Welcome to ClassroomUSA.net and USA Heartbeat, as well as StreetLevelAmerica.com. We're going to talk today about the Christian roots of America. And with me today is Mike Keating. Mike, glad to have you back on Mike's side here at Heartbeat, Classroom USA, and Street Level America as we talk about the Christian roots of this great nation. Now, what kind of my next comment may kind of date this a little bit, but this morning I was watching congressional hearings into Anthony Fauci, and there is a distrust of government by Americans, and we need to work on getting that restored. When the American government was initially started by our founding fathers, there was a strong embracing of the Christian theology and Christian religion. We need to get back to those roots once again. And Mike Keating is going to have a presentation today. I like the graphic behind you with the cross and the American flag. Mike, welcome. And what have you got for us today?
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here, and thanks for inviting me. Um, what I have is it's quite a bit of information, and it's really kind of a seminar, meant to be kind of a seminar. I don't know how well it's going to lend itself for a podcast format, but we're going to give it a shot, okay?
Let's do
And
it.
so we have, and I'm going to do a lot of talking and a lot of reading, but what we're going to do is we're going to go into the actual history of this country, and we're going to back up a little bit. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the early history of the country and the events leading up to the revolution. And just so we can kind of get our minds conditioned to what the colonists' lives were like. What was their world like at that time, and what were the motivating factors for the events of the revolution and our eventual separation from the British Crown. So we're going to be looking at that. The first part of this will be that history presentation. And then we're going to go from there. We're going to talk a little bit about the condition of the colonies. What were the colonies like, and what kind of language would you find in their individual state constitutions? And then we'll progress from that point on to what did the founders say? I'm a firm believer in primary sources and going back and listening to what the people who lived this and experienced this had to say. And I know there's schools of thought out there amongst the revisionist historians who I seem to draw like a magnet, uh, and that no, you can't trust what they say because they got to write the history, they got to pad it to make themselves look good and all this. I can tell you categorically, nothing could be further from the truth. The people of that generation, uh, they understood biblical morality. They understood that all liars shall have their part in the lake of fire that shall burn with brimstone and fire. And they had the fear of God. They had the respect of Christianity. So the two main questions that Pastor Davis put in front of us today are: were our founding fathers Christians? And the second part of that is: was America founded as a Christian nation? Well, by the time we're done with this, I think we ought to put those two questions to rest forever, because it's one of the easiest things to prove once you let the facts into the discussion. So, Dave, you let me know when you want to launch into that. I'm going to share my
Yeah,
screen with Pastor Dave, and I'll try to give him some opportunities in this to get a few words in edgewise. And Pastor Dave, I don't know, you just stop me when you got something you want to say, and I'll unshare, and we'll try to keep it rather loose.
sure. Okay. Let's go
Okay,
ahead and
very
do
good.
it. Let's start with it.
Awesome. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay. I got a USB clicker in my hand here. Let's make sure that was working. Okay, well, Yes, this is a rather lengthy presentation on the Christian roots of America. But if we're going to address this issue, well, let's look at the facts. Let's look at enough of those facts to form a consensus and to put any doubters, any doubt and unbelief to rest. So let's back up to what I would consider to be the earliest stages of our country. Some would want to roll it back a little earlier than this, but I normally do not do that because of a few reasons why this group of people was so vitally important to the founding of our country. And so for right now, let me take you to Leiden, which is in Holland. And you see the bridge in the background there. It's going
Yeah.
over the Rappenberg Canal. That building on the left is called Academy Bow. It's the Academy building for the University of Leiden. If you walk up to that bridge and you take a right turn, you'll be on an alleyway. It's called Bell Alley. And you walk about a half a block down that alleyway and you'll come to a large courtyard on the left and a very large Gothic cathedral to your left. And to the right of that was the site of Pastor John Robinson's house. And
Okay.
this is where, um, in his back courtyard, two-thirds of the Mayflower Pilgrims lived in 21 row homes that were back there. And this was their world for 11 years in this city here. And we're not going to back up. I do a very lengthy presentation on the Mayflower Pilgrims. In fact, some have said that it's one of the largest in the world. It takes about 20 hours. And you could ask rightly how anyone could speak for 20 hours on the Mayflower Pilgrims, but somehow I found a way and was able to really call out a lot of facts on their lives. And so we don't have time, and it really is outside the scope of this presentation to go much deeper on this, other than to weave them in at the very onset here and on the way to some very important decisions they made once they got to America. Well, what you're seeing in front of you, if you look to the right by that green boat, there is stairs. Those are stairs in that notch in the wall of the canal. And it
Mhm.
was
I
from
see it.
those stairs right there that the Mayflower Pilgrims boarded their barges, so they called barks during that day. And they sailed, what would be behind us. They sailed the direction of behind this vantage point, and they went out the Valais River. Now, I don't know, I hope everyone can see this cursor here, but this picture down on the lower
Yes.
left is a view looking down the Rappenberg Canal towards the Valais River. And they exited the city on that river, and this is the actual route drawn down the center line of that canal, and it is not changed since they had their journey, and they made their way to a city called Delfshaven. Today, it's right next to the city of Rotterdam. Now, those that are familiar with Holland, and on the where they landed was this church right here. This is Reformed Kirk, it means the Reformed Church, which dates from 1417. And of course, we're talking about 1620 here, actually about 1619, in the town of Delfshaven. And tied up in front of this, along the quay, which is that wall, that retaining wall for the water, was a small ship called the Speedwell. The Pilgrims had purchased this boat, and they hoped to sail this along with another ship that you may have heard about called the Mayflower that came out of London. And those two ships, it was intended for them to travel across the Atlantic to America, and they were going to keep the Speedwell in America, and they were going to use it to fish and send resources back to England to pay for this journey. Well, this is kind of where it started, and believe it or not, the passengers that were going to travel were on board the barges, but who were these people? They were a single identifiable Christian church. They had a pastor, Pastor John Robinson, who you'll come to find out was instrumentally important in the philosophies that would weave their way into the U.S. Constitution. And it really does start right here. Uh,
Wow.
their entire congregation, you know, men, women, and kids traveled overland to see them off here on this dockside. And this is a painting here of the scene that we'll discuss. And I don't know which version this is. There's two of these paintings. One is in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. So, you know, there's a series of about 12 murals, I think it is. And they chose this to be one of the important scenes to be included in the series of paintings there. And what you see here is a man in the center. He's got his Bible open, and that is Pilgrim Pastor John Robinson. And by the way, the scene at this dockside was witnessed by the townspeople there. In particular, one of their leading publications recorded this whole thing. They've got the whole thing in their newspaper, article. And so they know everything that was said. They know the sentiments, and it really was an emotional scene of departure here. In their day, this journey they were undertaking was tantamount of somebody going to the moon. This was a massive undertaking, and most of the people that were going on the journey were very young adults. This was a journey for young people. It was going to be very hard times. And
And some of these people may never come back. They may never see them again.
well, more than half of them died the first winter.
Yeah.
So, this was one of the reasons that they were willing to take the risk. They didn't know what they were going to run into. They didn't know how hostile the territories were going to be. And they certainly didn't anticipate that they weren't going to land where they intended. That was going to increase their risks and dangers significantly. But let's talk a little bit about this scene of departure here, because Reverend John Robinson wrote a letter that he read to the pilgrims on the dock of the Speedwell. And this is what he said. Lastly, whereas you are to become a body politic, using among yourselves civil government, and are not furnished with persons of special eminency above the rest, to be chosen by you into office of government, let your wisdom and godliness appear not only in choosing such persons as do entirely love and will promote the common good, but also in yielding unto them all due honor and obedience in their lawful administrations, not beholding in them the ordinariness of their persons, but God's ordinance for your good. Uh, Something really interesting here that
So a church started America.
in essence, I believe that to be the case. And we'll see that John Quincy Adams here, we'll get to a slide and I'll show this to you, what he said about this, that he considered, what they would do, and we'll get to the point of what I'm talking about in a document they created, where he considered it to be the template for the U.S. Constitution. So what do we see in Pastor Robinson's letter, and particularly in the yellow highlights? We have a body politic. That's representative government. And then you have chosen by you, which is an electoral process. And you have offices of government, which is a structure of government offices that promote the common good. And then you have the last part, which is yielding unto them all honor and obedience. That is called rule of law, okay, in our modern vernacular. These are chief principles of the U.S. Constitution. All right, so let's take a look here. Now they would sail across this fierce ocean, quite a bit of drama. I spend 2 days telling the story about their journey coming over here and setting up the colony on these shores. And and this is a great painting. It's by Dr. Haywood, who, by the way, is one of the leading Mayflower and really nautical type painting artists in the world. He he gave me everyone high resolution copies of every painting he did, plus permission to use them at my discretion. and he didn't ask for a penny. I can't thank this man enough. What he's known for is his ability to paint water. Look at the water on the shore
Oh,
and
yeah.
his cloak that's striped down in the water. If you didn't know better, you'd think you were looking at a photograph. I mean, his
Yeah.
ability to
Yeah.
paint water is one of the most difficult things to paint, and this guy is a master at it. And of course, this scene is their landing at Provincetown Harbor, the very first boatload ashore. This is the first land they've touched since they left England, 66 days previous, and they have been trapped midships in this relatively small quarters in the Mayflower, and uh, and they were running out of everything. They were running out of water. They were running, you know, and the first thing they did is they fell on the ground. They fell on their knees and blessed the God of heaven. This is in William Bradford's, their historian. William Bradford was, of course, on the
Mhm.
journey. He was one of the younger passengers. He was also the man who would serve as colonial governor of Plymouth Colony for plus over 40 years, and that he became their biographer. And something that you all might want to track down and get a copy of is his Of Plymouth Plantation. It's his Mayflower Diary. Covers the story of their lives in the three countries of their residence, England, Holland, and America. And it is a fascinating read. So he is recounting he was an eyewitness to this. This was the very first act they did. They fell on their knees and blessed the God of heaven for saving their lives, getting them. They had been in many storms, and it was very. They had the main mast of the Mayflower snapped, and of course, I didn't cover this, but they had to abandon the Speedwell back in England. It began to leak and wasn't seaworthy, so they kind of cut the size of the passenger list down and all got on board the Mayflower. So they only had this one ship. But they went through some very harrowing experiences, and well, they weren't sure if they were going to make it here.
Yeah.
Well, the very first
Amazing.
thing that they did when they got to the harbor, this particular harbor where they landed was 400 miles north of their intended destination in the Virginia colonies. All of their legal representation and governing structure applied in the Virginia colony. There was nothing that applied here where they landed, which was, of course, Provincetown Harbor and soon to be Plymouth, Massachusetts, which I'm sure many in the audience have probably visited. Uh, they didn't have a governmental structure. There was nobody in authority. So the first thing they did was they sat down, they created a document called the Mayflower Compact. And this document is signed November 11th, 1620, on board the Mayflower, was eventually published in 1622. The original's been lost to time. I do believe it exists. I believe the British stole it during the Revolutionary War. They stole the original copy, and it's probably in somebody's private collection over in England. That very thing happened to William Bradford's diary, by the way. And somebody had a moment of conscience in England and decided that it was too important to keep it over there, and they gifted it back to the State House in Massachusetts, where it is in a vault today. All of my attempts to try to get my hands on it have been fruitless, and I'll still try. But in any event, it is probably on the par of on the level of the Constitution and the Declaration of
Oh, yeah.
Independence in terms of its importance as a document. So what was this document, by the way? Well, it wasn't just any old document. It was a biblical covenant, by the way. And it starts in the name of God, amen. Okay. And
That's pretty explicit.
it's very explicit. That's a full sentence right there. And I'll show you the content of it and in the next slide. But John Quincy Adams, again, he was a descendant of Mayflower passenger John Alden, by the way. And he called the Mayflower Compact the foundation of the U.S. Constitution. That's the copy I have to read here. Says in the name of God, amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, King, defender of the faith, etc. Having undertaken for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith and honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these present solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and of one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. Hey, did we hear that somewhere?
That's that
Where
pretty
did that
much
come from? That comes
that
from
pretty much proves the
Pastor
case of
John Robinson's letter on the dock in Delfshaven. For our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof and to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinance, acts, constitutions,
constitutions.
offices, from time to time, as shall be thought most able and convenient. The word meet, by the way, in Old English means able and convenient for the general good of the colony. Do you see these highlighted yellow statements coming
Yes.
right out of Pastor John Robinson's departure letter? Unto which we promise all due submission and obedience. Okay, all of that, uh, those principles there are what John Quincy Adams pointed to as the template and founding principles of the Constitution.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a giant leap forward here because we really can't dwell on that history because we want to get up to the colonial period. We want to get up to uh, the part where we're starting to break away from England and form our own governmental structure. So what events led to that? Well, this is a handy dandy timeline here that we're going to use several times here as we kind of march up the checklist. And of course, we had the French and Indian War in 1855, I believe that started. And that was started by somebody you probably never heard of before. His name was George Washington. And I've tracked this history down and been to the original locations and stood on the very spot where the first shots of that were fired in what was really a debacle and something that got out of hand that Washington did not want to have happen. But anyway, it sparked the Indian War, the French and Indian War. It was a war that it spread through seven nations, I believe, on five continents, and it lasted, I believe, 7 years. But that's a separate presentation in itself. We won't cover here. They had something called the Proclamation of 1763. But by 1764 and 65, the British were starting to flex their muscles. The colonists, they were starting to act a little bit too independent. And of course, you've got all of the British forces over in England. And nothing's really enforcing the colonists at this point in time. So the British, they impose a couple taxes. Well, there's the Sugar Act and then the Stamp Act. And these did not go over well with the colonists.
Oh no.
Yeah. There was a lot of kickback from the colonists over these two acts. Let's talk a little bit about those two particular acts and visit a site here that's in Boston. Now, I've given tours of the Freedom Trail in Boston, and this is always one of my favorite places to take people, principally because it's largely intact structure from that time. And now and these buildings of that era have all gone through some renovations to keep them sound, but we'll talk a little bit about this one because it was the site of many very significant events and speeches in the history of the founding. And it is called Faneuil Hall. Okay, you can see it's Faneuil. A lot of people pronounce it Faneuil. That would be quite understandable. But the actual pronunciation is Faneuil, Faneuil Hall. And again, this is in Boston. And this is in particular where Samuel Adams and James Otis delivered very fiery anti-taxation speeches between 1764 and 1775. And they launched the phrase that we know today, no taxation without representation.
Representation.
that came from this very floor in front of you in protest of those two acts, the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act. Now, if you look down here in this lower inset photo that I put, you can see a kind of a reddish silhouette of a smaller building.
Hmm.
And that is actually the two-story version of this building in their time. And it was expanded later, I believe in 1806. And it was double. There it is right there. In 1742, this small structure was which they were speaking in existed. It was just these two stories. The roof was spanning the two walls, and the right-hand wall was in the center of this building, which would be right here in the center of this hallway. That used to be the width of the original building. So if you wanted to look for the floor space where they were speaking, it'd be on the left side of this building. And in 1806, they kicked that wall over and they doubled the size of it. They put another story on it, and then they put this large uh, roof rafter system on top of this. That's what you see if you visit there today.
Okay.
So, of course, as time went on, more bad blood began to brew. And then in 1768, it doesn't show on the timeline here, but we're kind of right around in here. The British began to send troops into Boston and occupy the city.
Right.
And now things are starting to get really serious with the colonists. And they had something called the Boston Massacre, and I'm sure you've heard about it. The picture on the left here is the troops entering Boston in 1768. That was the start. In fact, October 1st, 1768 was the start of the occupation. But it wasn't until 1770 that the massacre occurred. And this was a little bit of a stretch to call it a massacre. I think there was only about 7 people or so killed. I apologize, I don't have that fact in my head right now. But it was less than 10 people that were killed here. And it was something the British didn't certainly want to have happen. And that picture that you see on the right, maybe some of you have seen this before.
Yeah.
It's actually drawn by somebody maybe you've never heard of before. His name was Paul Revere, and he would go on to have some principal roles and play some parts in the Revolution story. But he was an extremely talented person. Not only, was he an artist and a printer, he was one of the finest tinsmiths and produced many artifacts. And he also had a foundry, and I believe it was over 800 bells in the city, and it were sent abroad as well, that came out of Revere's foundry. I've had the privilege of personally going up in steeples and seeing some of the original Revere bells, including
Wow.
his favorite. Maybe down the road we'll show some of those pictures. But in the Freedom Trail, journey there. But what you're
Yeah.
looking at in the center of that picture on the right is the front of the old State House, which was the State House. It was the center of British government in Boston at that time. Of course, the British took that over, and they were putting their magistrates in there, and so a good number of pleas before the British Crown happened in that building as well. But the picture's a little off. The forces were standing in front of that building, very near it, and they were pointing their rifles towards us. And the vantage point of the photo is where the people that were struck would fall. So anyway, just to kind of correct that little bit artistic license there. So that was the Boston Tea Party. And that created a lot of bad blood. And of course, Revere painted that, did that engraving, and it was a political statement, and it was a really a piece of propaganda that was distributed amongst the town people in Boston. And of course, this really flamed up the sentiments.
Oh, oh yeah. We've all heard about the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah. So that led to another development that we know today as the Boston Tea Party. And of course, there's a lot of history that we're skipping over, that for the sake of time, we will. And this happened on December 16th, 1773. Now, this is 3 years after the Boston Massacre, okay? It's roughly. And I've actually identified where this ship was tied up, which is actually on land now. Boston's about three times the size of what it was back in colonial days, and they steadily have filled in the harbor to make more room for buildings. And but we know within a reasonable distance approximately where this ship was tied up. And we also in the museum, the old state house that I showed in Revere's painting or engraving rather, that old state house is there today. And it's gone through a number of renovations, of course, but and it's been restored to its look during the colonist period. In there is now a museum, and you can see this vial, which is full of tea that was shaken out of the boots of Thomas Melville, who was one of the colonists who they all dressed up as Indians, and they were the ones that went out on the ship and threw the tea in the harbor. Well, they broke these containers open, and some of this tea ended up in his boot. So we have this wonderful relic from the event. And then that led to another thing in 1774 called the Intolerable Acts. We're getting up to the time period here where the colonists have about had enough. In 1774, the Intolerable Acts, which are also known as the Coercive Acts, that's what the British called them, they were four punitive laws passed by the British Parliament in that year in response to the Boston Tea Party. Of course, the British weren't too excited that they squandered all of their tea in the harbor. It cost them a lot of money, and they aimed to isolate and punish Massachusetts for the destruction of the British tea. But ultimately, it united the colonies against the crown. These were the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the Boston Port Act, which closed the Boston harbor to all commerce until the colonists paid for the destroyed tea. In other words, they basically did a naval blockade, and they weren't going to let anything into the city of Boston until the colonists ponied up and paid the British for the tea. And the Massachusetts Government Act revoked the colony's charter, replaced the elected officials with royal appointees, and strictly limited town meetings. So now we've got mass censorship coming in. You've got the takeover of the government structure in Boston, and you can see the tyranny coming in here. Then there was the Administration of Justice Act, which allowed the royal governor to move trials of accused British officials to Great Britain. That means there was no legal jurisprudence against any heinous act that would be committed by the British soldiers here in Boston. And they would just be sent back to Boston where they would supposedly face justice over there. And of course, we can only imagine what would never happen.
Yeah.
Then there was the Quartering Act. This required colonists to house the British soldiers in unoccupied buildings or private homes. This, as far, in my opinion, was the straw that broke the camel's back. This was the line they went too far. That was the red line. And while the British forces had been quartering themselves on Boston Common, which is a large green space, still there today, and they were running out of room. They kept sending more troops over, so they needed places to stay. So if you were living in Boston at that time, you'd be safe and secure in your home, and you'd hear a knock on the door, and it'd be a band of 5 or 6 British soldiers that would just promptly move in. And you can imagine this led to the ravaging of their women. It ravaged the ravaging of their daughters, and all of this is a matter of record. And the colonists at this point in time were not going to sit by and let this happen. So here's a little bit of a scene that I think kind of accurately depicts that. You can see the look on the man of the house's face over here, the resentment in his eyes. You see the
Oh,
fear
yeah.
in the wife. You see the kids in terror there, with the British with their swords drawn, and probably a grandmother in the background with the courage to push these soldiers away and say, "No, not on my watch." And so yeah, this was the red line. And what it led to was the colonists banding together We have 13 colonies at that point in time. 12 of the 13 at this time would band together in a loosely knit governmental structure that would really be the first federal government of the United States. It was called the First Continental Congress, and we're going to say quite a bit about that right here. Now, this slide basically just shows that it was a response to the intolerable acts, the Boston Tea Party, and all of those things that we covered in the timeline. British taxation, loss of self-governance, and the delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia on September 5th, 1774. The actions taken by this Congress, this was the fact that this is the first Continental Congress suggests that there would be a second, which is the case. And the first one, they tended to something called the Continental Association. We would call it today the Articles of Association, you know, in our historical context. And then that led to the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. Now, right now, they weren't separating from Britain, but they were going to send their complaints uh, to England, and they were very careful not to be too critical of the royal crown because they were still under siege by British forces. And of course, they planned to reconvene the following year, which led to the Second Continental Congress, which did some remarkably important things. Okay, so here are the acts of the first. There basically are four most important founding documents. They are the Articles of Association, 1774. They are the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the Articles of Confederation in 1777, and the Constitution of the United States in 1787. Um, so we're going to go through from this point on, and we're going to talk a little bit about each one of these documents. We're going to talk about the events that led up to them, who the players were, and what was in them. Okay, so to start with, we have to visit this building. Now, those that have visited Philadelphia may have seen this building. It is one of the most important buildings in the country. It was the first building, by the way, and it's gone through a lot of renovations. It seems like in the course of time, despite the important history that happened here, they didn't seem too concerned with preserving our initial history in this country. And these things went into disrepair in some cases, were converted into something that didn't even resemble what they had looked like. And so while this structure has remained relatively intact, its facade has gone through different looks and the interior has been renovated, but it's all been restored uh, as best as could be determined to the configuration it would have been in during this First Continental Congress. And what this building was, it's called Carpenter's Hall. It was a showpiece for the Carpenter Guild of that day, where they would use the best materials, the best practices to construct this building to show their expertise in carpentry and building, construction. And so this again was the site of the First Continental Congress. They did not have the opportunity to use Independence Hall because it was too dangerous at that time. These were the first steps of secession here, even though they weren't painting it as such. It had the potential to become that, and they knew that had they held this in a more public venue, a something that was at that time the foundations of the British structure in Philadelphia, that they would probably not get this off the ground. So they decided to hold it here. Now, I'll back up 1 second. Now, you see these two windows right here. Yeah, if you can see my mouse,
Yes.
these two windows right here are the two windows right here in this photo. So we're looking out the side of the building. Now we're inside the main entrance. You couldn't see in the previous slide. It was around the far right side. And that plaque that's in the floor is in line with the front door, which is, flush with the wall that you do see, but just can't see it in the picture. So that's the front entrance there. During the time of the Continental Convention, Building was divided in two, and there were two walls forming a hallway. Where that plaque in the floor is would have been in a hallway. For some time, I wondered which side did the Continental Congress meet in? And I actually got an answer to that in a document where somebody that occupied the opposite side had an office there, and he gave a compass direction for his window. And so we know that the floor space that you're looking at is where the Continental Congress met. And you can, just about name your founding fathers. They were participants in this. Okay. You've got Washington, you've got Jefferson, Adams, Franklin, all these guys meeting right here on this floor in front of you. At the time, they didn't have this tile floor. It was a wooden plank floor. I would imagine a lot of the paneling on the walls is also reproduction, but the floor space and those chairs that you see in the background is original to the Continental Congress. Some of our greatest founding fathers may have sat in those chairs.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing. You're talking about the chairs next to the windows.
sure. Do you want me to shell out here and come back?
No, it's fine.
Oh yeah.
No,
You had
we're good.
something to add to that?
No, no, it's just amazing to think that those chairs sat our founding fathers. It's just, I love history like you do. And it's just amazing to just think about that.
Every time I come in here, I get goosebumps because of the events that happened in here. And even though the First Continental Congress only lasted a matter of months, the course of they put things into motion that formed this country. And major historians have looked at this floor space right in front of you and called this the foundation of America. Happened right
Wow.
here. And so this is in the front of my mind when I come in here. I often stand and stare at those chairs and then wonder, we'll never know, but wondered, was there a Franklin, in this one? Was there an Adams? Was there a Washington? We'll just never know. But there again, you never know. You never know. Those characters could have occupied one of those seats. Now, there's several of these chairs that are in other locations as well. So they do have quite a few of them. But that's the
Yeah.
that floor space of this place, and just please do not miss visiting this building if you take a tour of Philadelphia and you go here. If you are standing and looking at the front of Independence Hall, then you are on Chestnut Street, and you will walk 3 doors down to your left, and you will see two long buildings and a courtyard, long courtyard in the front of this building, which would be the doorway to your left here. So, okay, one of the questions posed for today, Pastor Dave asked, were our founding fathers Christians?
Go.
Well, let's take a look at the first event that happened in this Continental Congress. They opened the Continental Congress on September 5th, and on the 7th, 2 days later, the very first thing they did was call for a minister. And his particular name was Reverend Duché. He was of a Huguenot, French Huguenot background. The location of his house is, which isn't there today, but is marked. They know where it stood. Reverend Duché was brought in on the 7th, and they asked him to give a prayer for safety and protection of the Congress and the town of Boston and Philadelphia. And this is, by the way, you can download for free the journals of the Continental Congress of America. And those are PDFs that can be downloaded from probably Library of Congress website, but Google it. I think you'll find it. And this is the journal entry for this day of the prayer by Reverend Duché. And you can see his name mentioned there. Anyway, and the contents of the prayer is well known. They printed these flyers up, whichever you want to call them, posters, pamphlets, that contain the prayer. And here it is. I thought I would be able to read this, but in Zoom, I have things that are sitting over the top of my slides, so I can't read the top of all of that. But in any event, um, Reverend Duché was asked after the fact to reconstruct his prayer from memory and to write it out, and he did so. And this is his text. And if I back up, you can see it. But I won't take the time to read this prayer, but I will say this, that the effect that this had moved the colonists off their feet. It moved them to their knees and then off their knees. It was so moving and emotional the way he gave this. And John Adams had a lot to say about it. In 1875, the Library of Congress produced a placard. Now, this is, 100 years roughly after the event, summarizing the various reports from the founders on the impact of this first prayer on the Continental Congress. And this is what it said. Washington was kneeling there, and Henry, Randolph, Rutledge, Lee, and Jay. And by their side stood bowed in reverence the Puritan patriots of New England, who at that moment had reason to believe that an armed soldiery was wasting their humbled households. It was believed that Boston had been bombarded and destroyed. They prayed fervently for America, for Congress, for the province of Massachusetts Bay, and especially for the town of Boston. And who can realize the emotion which they turned imploringly to heaven for divine interposition? It was enough, said Mr. Adams, to melt a heart of stone. I saw the
Wow.
tears gush into the eyes of the old grave Pacific Quakers of Philadelphia. So you get the scene, you get the emotion, and you have our founding fathers gathered together here. This painting, by the way, was done. I think I put the source on the top here, which I can't see, but the author is known, and he painted this, and along with this, he painted a key, um, which I did not display. But every one of these people has an identity, and there it is. And I'll leave this up on the screen for a second. You can wind the video back if you want to have fun with this. And you can find out who your favorite founding father is in here, but you can see, here's Washington kneeling right here. And this is done, from historical sources. You have Reverend Duché in the behind the pulpit, and you have John Adams right here behind this guy. So you can pick your favorite founding father out, but they were present for this. And this was the very first act of the Continental Congress that really was beginning to form the United States. We
They still do that
particularly know
today, don't
the
they?
impact.
They still start the congressional session with a prayer, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now this will be, I'll leave this a little bit on the screen here. I won't take the time to read it, but John Adams, his wife Abigail was up in Boston, which was their house. They actually lived in Boston, and just a month before this prayer, they had moved to what was then Braintree, which we call Quincy today. Which of course, his estate is up there, and his where he's buried, and John Quincy as well. And it's a great place to visit. But he wrote a letter to his wife, Abigail. And Abigail Adams was just a fantastic source because she was so astute and so eloquent in her writings about the events that were taking place of the Revolution. Her writings are as valuable as any of the founding fathers. And they went back and forth about this letter, in particular to John Adams wrote to her and telling her about the effects, not only that Duché's prayer had had, but the Psalms that were read accompanying it. And the effect that they had on them. And you can see his excitement and his enthusiasm in the tone of this letter to her. He was literally taken back by the event. So, the very first course of action, they undertook a project to create something called the Articles of Association. And what this was going to do was be the defining documents that were knitting these 12 of the 13 colonies together. And I don't know whether the 13th one 13th one ever joined during this Constitutional Congress. Uh, Article, it was the Constitutional Convention would be later, but this is the Continental Congress. And I don't know if that 13th entity ever joined, but 12 of the 13 banded together under this document, which become very important because this would be what they were under while they would go to the next task, which is the Declaration of Independence. And interestingly enough, let me point out on this, we won't take the time to, elaborate on everything that this document did, but one of the interesting clauses that was in here was a ban on the slave trade. And let me point out that records show that
Wow.
a substantial portion of these delegates in this Continental Congress were slave owners, and some of them the most major slave owners of the colony. Despite this fact, they voted to put a ban on slavery in their colonies. And that would take effect on December 1st of 1774. This is already September, October, November, December. So it's less than 3 months later, they're going to enforce a ban on the slave trade. Now, the events of the what I call the pre-revolution are occurring in two primary places, Boston and Philadelphia. Boston, the legislative stuff, the formative stuff is happening down there. In Boston, the kinetic stuff is taking place, the occupation, the rejection of the colonists, of the British forces, and events like this one, which would lead up to the first shots of the revolution, which were happening in April of 1775. Now, this would be, what, 5, 6 months from the Continental Congress, First Continental Congress. And these first shots, everybody's heard about the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And the fighting started, of course, on Lexington Green, which is depicted here in this painting. And then it would progress shortly thereafter to this bridge right here. And perhaps you've heard of the shot that was fired that was heard around the world. And that was fired on this bridge. Well, not this one, but the one that stood in its place, the pilings of which were dug out of the creek bed directly under this one. So they know where that bridge sat. And they've constructed a replica as close as they can imagine that one had looked. And but this is where the shots, and some people regard this shot as the first shot of the revolution, as a little bit of a stretch because there were shots fired and people killed on Lexington Green before this. And then shortly thereafter, that was in April, May, June, about a month and a half to 2 months later, we had the Battle of Bunker Hill, which in itself is a little bit of an anomaly because it wasn't Bunker Hill was the hill next to this. This is actually Breed's Hill. So Bunker Hill was actually fought on the wrong hill. So I mean, the historians have, I think it's just easier at this stage to just change the name of Breed's Hill to Bunker Hill. But in any event, it doesn't seem to bother anybody where it was fought. The events that took place there are what were important. And that's a study in itself of what had happened there. And some of the great heroes of the American Revolution, like Joseph Warren, would come out of this battle. And sayings like, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes, you know, just incredibly important things. If you, everybody knows about the Old North Church in Boston, where
Yeah.
the lanterns were hung in the staples, Paul Revere lanterns. Most people don't know that the basement of that, a lot of key people, including Pitcairn, who was a British general that was killed in this, particular Battle of Bunker Hill, were buried in the basement of that church. If you go down there, I believe there's over 1,000 people that were buried and interred in the basement. And I had the luxury and the pleasure of going through there with one of the curators who, after hours took me down there and then let me photograph everything in that basement. and I made some interesting discoveries while I was down there. But in any event, that's the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now I'll try to weave that's just a little lesser known historical facts into this. And it probably isn't one in 10 Revolutionary War historians that really know about this. But I want to tell you the story about four cannons. And when the British were occupying Boston, the colonists, of course, in Lexington and Concord, they were fortifying themselves up there. And Concord, that was their armory. What little gunpowder and armaments and things that the colonists did have were kept in an armory in Concord. And, uh, and they had no cannons. They had no real heavy artillery. So what the colonists did was, under cover of darkness, they snuck into Boston, and right under the noses of the British forces, they stole four cannons. Two of those cannons are in front of you right now. Two of the four. Two of them, these went on to be used during the Revolution battles, but these two were later recovered and had been identified as two of the four that were stolen by the American colonists. Well, this really infuriated General Gage, who was the British
I'll
general
bet it did.
in Boston, and even though he gave more important reasons for wanting to send his British forces to march up into Lexington and Concord, he did make mention of wanting them to get these cannons back. Okay, this was really a sore spot with him, and he was going to get these cannons back by hook or crook because he was not going to let those subversives steal cannons under the noses of the mightiest army on earth. You could see the pride that he was feeling about this. Well, the cannon, if you visit there today, if you want to see the Hancock cannon, I showed you the bridge. You'd have to go to Concord and visit that bridge, that reproduction bridge. If you cross it and you go up a pathway up the hill to the right, there is a Park Service built. That's a little mini museum there, and you got restrooms and everything up there. And the Hancock rather cannon is on display there. And this is a photo I took of it there in the upper left. Now the one on the lower right, for a number of tours that I gave here, it was nowhere to be found, and it wasn't until a subsequent tour that I had taken a couple people in here, and lo and behold, there was the Adams cannon, and I had no idea how it got back there, but I later was given the story of where they located it, and it was the Park Service actually had it. But here you see in front of you two of those four cannons, and they are regarded by some historians as the spark that started the American Revolution. So just how important are these two cannons? I think I would make a point if I was visiting this town to track these down and get some pictures of them. And there's a cannonball that wasn't necessarily fired. These are 3 pounders. There's a 3 pound cannonball to the left, symbolic of what they would have fired. That was actually dug out of the ground on Bunker Hill.
Wow.
And this is the monument on Bunker Hill you'll see today. Actually, they're actually taking parts of this apart, all the way up. You find some of the pictures, you wonder how the thing's still standing. They are renovating it, and apparently there was some degradation in the stonework that they're fixing. And the inset on the upper right, you can see that these two cannons, were at one time hung by brackets in the very top of this, where those windows are.
Okay.
When I visited that, you gotta walk up this, by the way, so you'll get a little winded going up this. But when you get to the top, you'll still see the brackets up there. Uh, and that leads us to the time frame of the Second Continental Congress. This is a Congress that would move to Independence Hall, and they would produce three of our important founding documents: the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution of the United States. So let's talk about the first of those three, the Declaration of Independence. That would really be their first order of business. President Calvin Coolidge gave a speech at the 150th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and we have just celebrated the 250th anniversary. And I was sorely disappointed by the festivities and the activities and the sentiments that I heard broadcast virtually on every channel, which bear no resemblance to what had happened on the 150th, much less the 50th anniversary, which were major celebrations in this country. For the 150th, President Calvin Coolidge said this: people at home and abroad consider Independence Hall as hallowed ground and revere the Liberty Bell as a sacred relic. That pile of bricks and mortar, that mass of metal, might appear as only the outgrown meeting place and the shattered bell. But to those who know, they have become consecrated. They are the framework of a spiritual event. The world looks upon them because of their associations of 150 years ago, as it looks upon the Holy Land because of what took place there 1900 years ago. Yeah, 150 years later, I don't call them our founders, but our legislators and our presidents still regarded what happened in Independence Hall with the Declaration of Independence as hallowed ground, and that these were sacred relics.
And to that extent, that's why we're doing this. That's why we're having these shows talking about and digging into it. But I digress.
I think we desperately need to have the shows because of the lack of any of this kind of history that was shared on July 4th of this year. So I
Oh,
hope the people,
it was disgusting.
well, I saw a lot of Taylor Swift. I saw a lot of the who's who of the rap world and the country western, and that's what it's become, of a popular spectacle, another opportunity for the popular culture to display itself.
And
And
sell
and the
concert
history
tickets.
of this, yeah, the history of this was almost absent. Now there were some, to be fair, some programs that were broadcast. There was one good one on George Washington, a couple other on the founding history, but by and large, if that occupied 2% of the airwaves and television broadcasts on that day, that would be a generous estimate. So let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. The Continental Congress had two people that were really obvious choices for someone who could handle the task of creating a draft version of the document that they would all analyze, that they would all debate. And this task fell to Thomas Jefferson. Now, I don't recall exactly. It's an easy Google search to find out how many languages this young man at the time had mastered. I know that Greek and Latin were two of them, and certainly English, but he was perhaps one of the most intelligent human beings that's ever lived. His intellect was unparalleled in his day. And everybody that knew him, and certainly this body, recognized those abilities in him and chose him to create the draft. Now, I will point to the text at the bottom here. I want to read this because it's written by Daniel Webster on the 50th year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, when it was the anniversary of the signing of the Declaration, which occurred on August 2nd. While the Declaration had been approved on the 4th of July, and the founders pointed back to that as the anniversary date of the Declaration, it wouldn't be till August 2nd that the official proceedings of making this document official had taken place and run their course. That would be the creation of an engrossed copy, and then placing of the signatures of all the attendees of the of the Congress on the document. So anyway, this is what Daniel Webster had said about, and by the way, you'll want to get this. If you can go online, it's a free download. Get the speech that Daniel Webster gave at Faneuil Hall on August 2nd in Boston, and you'll be able to find it. And then just download that, make a copy of it, whatever, and read that whole thing. It is terrific. For the sake of time, we can't go through it, but it is one of the greatest accounts of the history of this period and this document ever written. And I'm only extracting one little paragraph of it here, but the most accurate account of what was transpiring at that time that I have ever read is in Daniel Webster's handwriting uh, in this document. Uh, Make sure to grab that. Here's what he says. Mr. Jefferson drew up the paper. The original draft is brought by him from his study and submitted to the other members of the committee with interlineations in the handwriting of Dr. Franklin and others in that of Mr. Adams, was in Mr. Jefferson's possession at the time of his death. Now, what he's referring to here is not the very first copy that he created, of which and I'll show you the pictures of the fragments of that still exists, but it's the copy that he worked to. It was 4 pages of it exist, the entirety of it, and that was what was laid before the Second Continental Congress in Independence Hall that they debated and they arrived at the Declaration of Independence from. And this is what he's referring to here. Those papers were in Jefferson's possession at the time of his death. They are in the Library of Congress now, the original documents. And the high resolution scans of those can be found on their website. Some changes were made in it at the suggestion of other members of the committee and others by Congress while it was under discussion, but none of them altered the tone, the frame, the arrangement, or the general character of the instrument as a composition. The Declaration is Mr. Jefferson's. It is the production of his mind, and the high honor of it belongs to him. This is Daniel Webster, 50 years after the fact, ascribing what they all knew, that this document came out of the mind of this man. The changes that were altered, the things that were incorporated in the final draft of the Declaration were relatively insignificant as to leave this almost solely a product of his mind. Well, we giving tours of Philadelphia. I can also show you where Thomas Jefferson was when he wrote this initial draft. And of course, the original house is lost to time, but they have created a replica building in the period look that sits on the site. And then on this site is where Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. He worked on it from June 11th to June 27th, 1776. And of course, he would present this document on the 1st of July to the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress. This was known as the Graff House, and Thomas Jefferson rented 2 rooms and an upper floor here where he did this work. And I'll go back to that picture here. That's probably that inset picture in the red bound border there, probably a pretty good, accurate depiction of what was taking place in this room. He had along Thomas Jefferson and he had along Ben Franklin. And there, of course, is Thomas Jefferson standing. And you see all this wadded up paper on the floor, and they were, basically hashing over this initial draft that they would send to Congress. Another treasure that we have today is Jefferson's writing desk that he wrote the Declaration on. A lot of people don't realize it exists. But it was built at this time by cabinet maker Benjamin Randolph in early 1776. To Jefferson's specification, he actually designed it. And it was upon this very surface that Jefferson composed the Declaration of Independence. It was gifted by Jefferson on November of 1825 to his grandson-in-law, Joseph Coolidge, and I often wondered if that's Calvin Coolidge's, ancestor, as a wedding present with an attached handwritten note authenticating his role. So he gifted this desk to his grandson-in-law with a paper saying, "This is the surface I wrote the Declaration of Independence on." So there is no doubt.
What a wedding gift.
What a wedding gift. Yeah. Of course, this is in the Smithsonian Institute now. I don't know if they display it or not. Perhaps you'll find it there.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That's another
It's
story.
in the Second Continental Congress met there to manage the war effort and then make decisions about the formation of a new republic. And they issued a plea for help from France and Spain at the same time. Of course, fighting had already begun. They were already having to manage forces before the declaration. Among independents from England were John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Roger Livingston, and Thomas Jefferson. And it was Jefferson's duty to write the draft copy. We've been over that. He took 17 days to produce it. Now, at the time, Jefferson was staying in that rented room I showed the reproduction of with cabinet maker Benjamin Randolph. He's the one that made this, but he was actually rooming with Jefferson at that time. The very same person Jefferson had commissioned to build this writing box. He was the proprietary of one of the most successful cabinet making shops in Philadelphia. And he also made desks for notable others, including Washington. People envied having a desk made by this man. He was so talented at it. Um, so let's move on and talk a little bit more about this earliest draft. These two fragments that you see on the lower right side are the only remaining fragments of the initial draft, the very initial draft that Jefferson had had written. And you do see some crossouts, some amendments. They could have been Jefferson's amendments himself. I can't tell you whether any of those are Adams and Franklin, but I can say that these four documents here, which are the four documents that were prepared by Jefferson with the aid of Franklin and Adams, were produced in the hand of Jefferson and include notations by Franklin and Adams in the margins and in between lines. And these are the four documents right here that Jefferson had in his possession when he died. There's the first two pages and the second two pages, and they are the primary source for the Declaration of Independence as we know it today. Okay, this says pretty much what I just said. Talks about this as a 1,337 word document, written primarily by Jefferson, receiving 86 edits from the likes of Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, and later the entire Continental Congress. The final version is several hundred words shorter than the original. Now, that answers a little bit of questions there. That some of those notations may be from some of the other members of the Second Continental Congress. So that was the bulk of all the discussions was collated in those 4 pages. Uh, some changes were more significant than others. Uh, some of the rights which we know today as self-evident were originally sacred and undeniable. Citizens were originally subjects, and I'm glad they got rid of that because the document that was to come here was changing that status from subjects to citizens. Perhaps most crucial of all, the 28th grievance against King George III was cut out of the final draft that Jefferson wrote the crown. And what is that grievance? I can't read the number of the grievance. I think it's noted at the top in the title here. But you know, the Declaration of Independence was basically a list of grievances against the crown and they were numbered. And this, in his initial draft, was one of those grievances. Take a look at what it says.
It's against
That
slavery.
Yeah, King George. Now, I've heard it said that Jefferson's draft banned slavery. It did not. The purpose of the document was it did not have the authority. What they were doing was submitting grievances and then notifying the British Crown that they were withdrawing from the colonies. That's the purpose of the document of the Declaration. But this is what it said. That King George III had waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life, liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. Now he's talking about the slave ships here. And I've got quite a bit of information on the slave ship and the abominable conditions that the African slaves were in as they traversed the Atlantic. And he squashed the colonies. Now just pay a particular attention to this last line that the king had squashed the colonies' every legislative attempt to prohibit or to restrain this execrable commerce. You know what that's saying right there is that the colonists before this document had tried multiple times to abolish the practice of slavery, and the king would not allow it. The British Crown and their ordinances would not allow it. We're going to see that crop up again down the road when we talk a little bit more about that. Jefferson maintained that the deletion was made at behest of delegates from South Carolina and Georgia. Of course, more than half of this alliance of the 13 colonies were slave states. Historians have suggested that it was necessary because the passage was so blatantly hypocritical as to be embarrassing. I will comment that those later historians are revisionist historians that are not interested in conveying the actual sentiments. Historian Joe Lepore writes in the New Yorker, in itself a liberal document, and its erasure marked the beginning of centuries of political attempts to pretend that slavery never happened. They did no such thing. Our founders never pretended that slavery never happened. Even our subsequent generations never pretended that to be the case. Um, did they do a perfect job in dealing with the issue of slavery? I would say that there were things that could have been done that should have been done that weren't done, but there were also uh, reasons why they weren't done. Some of these things weren't done because it would have violated law. We'll talk about that later. Days after the Declaration was ratified, Jefferson sent a letter to Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, worried that the revisions actually improved the document. He was suspicious that any of these amendments that had been incorporated were actual improvements. He said, "You will judge whether it is better or worse for the critics," he wrote, unsure. Yeah. This is the scene of the approval process of the Declaration. And after Jefferson had hand carried the 4 copies in there and the delegates approving such. Now, I'm going to show you the inside of Independence Hall today. Just take a look at some of the features on the wall. You know, the chair, the Washington standing there, the chair behind him, the desks, the color of the. You see the pillars here with the capitals that are on these and the triangular feature in this here. Take a look at the room today.
Wow.
It is exact. Now, what I don't know, what I can't tell you is whether that is a modern painting, putting the founders' images into it, or whether this is a period painting that they based the 1933 renovations of Independence Hall on? I do not have the answer to that question. I do have some of the earliest photos that were ever taken, and even lithographs that were done of the interior of Independence Hall, and it is markedly different than what you see in front of you now. So there is some questions as to what we see now, what it was like in the room at that time. But what I can tell you, there are two witnesses to history that are in this room right now, just two. Everything else is either a renovation or a reproduction.
Okay.
The first of those two would be the frieze up here, that carving. And the second is this, which I regard as perhaps the most important historical artifact that America has.
A chair.
Yeah, that chair right there is called the Rising Sun Chair. And it was in this chair that General Washington, George Washington initially sat in the Second Continental Congress and then for the Constitutional Convention. And he managed the events of both. And just think about it. The voices of everything that was said in the ratification of either of those documents echoed off of that chair.
Wow.
In
It's just
particular,
amazing to
and the
think.
reason why this is called the Rising Sun Chair, I don't think I put an inset in here, but this is a horizon with a half crescent sun and then rays of light coming outward from it. And it's especially notable because of a man that sat over here, happened to be the oldest person present at the convention, the Constitutional Convention, who made the comments in his diary. He's sitting approximately in this spot over here. His name was Benjamin Franklin. And he said, I often gazed upon that rising sun during the convention and wondered if it was a rising sun or a setting sun. I think that is, it summarizes the sentiments of many people that were present in this room who didn't know whether they were signing their death warrants by signing the Declaration of Independence or whether or not the Constitutional Convention would create a government that would succeed. All of these ideas and doubts were present in the minds of these men. And this one particular image that's still with us today that we can actually go see for ourselves. If you visit here, I am actually taking this photograph from behind the gate that they have up, Salo Gate. And all the tours, the times that I've been here, I've never gotten past that wall, never got into that room. But from there, you can zoom your camera in to get a really good picture of that rising sun chair. And you can online, there are many good pictures of it. But those are treasures for this country, absolute treasures of this country.
Wow.
I'll just recount an instance where I was leading in the course of my professional career. We actually had a convention here, and we had a group of people that were out just really just having dinner. And on the way back, just kind of as a side thought, oh, isn't Independence Mall down here? Can we go see the Liberty Bell? And I said, yeah, I think I could probably show you the Liberty Bell, you know. And and we did that. And of course, you couldn't get into any of these buildings; they were all closed. But I happened to stand on my tiptoes. If you go across the street from where the Liberty Bell Pavilion is, I stood up on my tiptoes, and then looking through the exterior window, I could see just the back of Washington's Rising Sun chair. This is all I could see was the back of this chair. And I said, well, how convenient is this? And I proceeded to tell them the story. And I got their backs to the front of Independence Hall. And I told them the story about the Constitutional Convention and the Declaration of Independence and what is known today as the signing room. And then I told them the story about Washington's chair and the rising sun and Franklin's comments about that. And I said, well, if you'll turn around and if you'll stand on your tippy toes and look through the lower left pane of glass here, there's 9 panes in the glass, I believe 9, might be 12. and that lower pane has 9. I said, you can see, the only thing you can see is the back of Washington's chair and the rising sun. Well, I think a lot of those people, there were a lot of, oh my gosh, the people there, and the fact that we couldn't get near it and we couldn't get to it, I just think made its unattainability made it all the more special that they were able to see it. And
Wow.
I think some of these people may have come back the next day too to see, from the inside. But in any event, it was one of the things that I won't forget of in the giving tours of these things down here in Independence Mall. Uh,
Wow.
so that's the interior of Independence Hall. Again, I believe this May, I can't see the top again, Pastor Dave. You may be able to
Excerpts
see
from
whether this
Daniel
comes.
Webster's special 1 week after both of them died in July 4th, or exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence was
There you go.
signed.
So this is Daniel Webster's
Speech.
recounting again his speech, 50 years that we looked in Faneuil Hall, that floor space where he was standing when he gave this. Again, this is some of the description he gives of the debate on the Declaration and the approval of it. So it'll give you the timeline. So let's just kind of skim through this a little bit. The Declaration having been reported to Congress by the committee, the resolution itself was taken up and debated on the first day and second of July. That's what he's stating there. On which last day, meaning the second, it was agreed to and adopted. So on the second day, they basically reached a consensus that they were going to adopt it. So what happened on July 4th? Having thus passed the main resolution, Congress proceeded to consider the reported draft of the Declaration. It was discussed on the second and third and fourth days of the month in committee. And on the last of those days, being the 4th of July, being reported from that committee, um, it received the final approbation and sanction of Congress. It was ordered at that same time that copies be sent to the several states and that it be proclaimed at the head of the army. The declaration thus published did not bear any of the names of the signatories um, of the president and secretary. Then on the 19th day of July, as it appears by the secret journal of Congress, resolved that the declaration passed on the 4th be fairly engrossed on parchment with the title and style of the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, and that same, when engrossed, be signed by every member of Congress, and that the second day of August following, the declaration being engrossed and compared at the table, was signed by the members. So you see what had transpired here. They actually made the final approval on the 4th. Then on the 19th, they sent for an engrossed copy to be produced. And they hired a local printer to do this. He went out and got the best parchment he could find and prepared the plate, um, you know, um, engraving, and that he would transcribe this to that document. And and of course, what are they transcribing from? The draft copy of the Declaration here.
Amazing, amazing story of the start of America, and we can see God's handprint over all of it, especially in the early days when the Pilgrims were here. Uh, Start of government operations. The very first thing that the Congress did was pray, and it's codified in parchment, the prayer of Congress. Um, and then your remark about 250 years after that, uh, basically, there's people that are just trying to kind of erase the significance and the sacredness of the start of America and turning it into just another concert where we have big name celebrities and just basically an excuse to have a party. Well, patriots like us, I saw what you're talking about, and I also agree with your discussed that this is not just a concert. This is the birthday of a nation. And there are many, and what really makes it significant to me is I've talked, as you probably have as well, talked to mothers who have given their children who have died in the service for this nation. And I never will forget the words of one mother telling me, please tell my son died for something important. And so when I saw them basically just having all the big name celebrities, just another concert on the tour, uh, that offended me.
I couldn't agree with you more, Pastor Dave. We have cheapened the incalculable cost that these documents and this government have cost the people, have cost the citizenry. It and I just words can hardly describe that disgust that I felt on that day. I thought here we have a prime opportunity. We're going to see somebody out there step up, and it's not going to be business as usual with the normal Fourth of July, where it's another day off. It's fireworks.
A barbecue.
It's barbecue grill. So yeah, it's sad. It's actually sad to say. And I know we're not alone. There's millions of Americans
Oh
out
yeah.
that feel the same way about this. Now, the interesting thing, if we'll get back to this in the bottom section of text there, that Daniel Webster notes that no report of the debate on the Declaration was ever made. So we have absolutely no idea at this stage of the game, other than the annotations that are on the the 4 pages, what was discussed. I mean, and maybe they wanted it that way. Maybe it was for good reason because they knew that this was a document that would be looked on by Britain as absolute treason to the crown.
Oh yes.
And when they fixed their names to it, I believe it was Franklin that said that we better hang together or surely we'll hang separately. Meaning we better stick together and organize ourselves and form something formidable that can resist the forces of England, or we're goners. That's what was going on in their heads. So just think of the courage these men had.
I
Get
do.
get and a recounting of what happened to the signers of the Declaration. How many of them lost and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor
Good honors.
in their documents. And look at how many of them lost exactly that. Several of them lost sons. Uh, some of them lost everything they had. Some of them were in prison. It just this founding group here paid a heavy toll.
Amen. Amen. And here
And
is the
and of
portrait.
course, there is the document itself. This is the one you'll see if you go to the Archives building in Washington, D.C. today. You'll see it in heavy security. You'll also see it on heavy environmental production. You can see it's extremely degraded condition. And this is for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that when this document was finally ratified, it went on tour. It didn't stay put, and they just somebody would roll it up, stick it under their arm, and take it down the street and roll it out on a table. Hey, look at this. This is the original. Maybe it wasn't that lax, but certainly no efforts until very recent times were made to protect this from the ravages of light, UV radiation, moisture, humidity. And so now, they're doing the best they can they'll never be able to reverse it, but just to keep its further degradation from happening.
Right.
Uh, Now, I've heard the revision historians try to downplay the importance of this document, and they say, well, you're never going to know if this is the original or not. There are at least 5 legitimately signed copies, which is
Yeah.
true.
Okay, but I think that's semantics. The theme behind it, the reason for it, is more important than the document. And we can easily get sidetracked into minutia and the finer points as they try to pick and what they're trying to do is they're trying to degrade the importance and the sacredness of this document and the importance of the United States of America. It's just, oh well, we'll just destroy this, do away with the Supreme Court, do away with the office of presidency, and have the House of Representatives just kind of select your president. They are trying to destroy the equal branches of power that were instituted by brilliant minds and replace it with something else. And I never will forget the person said, "Okay, well, you're going to do away with the office of president and have them selected by the House of Representatives. What are you going to call this person? Oh, I don't know, Grand Poobah. Ha 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 ha. It's not funny. It's insulting.
It
And
is absolutely insulting.
one of the things I have done. There's a document here I'm holding up, trying to the blue screen, green screen is trying to hide it there. But this is a copy of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. This one is made by the Cato Institute, CATO, and you can buy them online. I buy 3 copies at a time. This is my 4th copy. I always have it in my back pocket, and I've worn 3 of these out. This is my 4th one. I'm going to carry it until I wear it out. I'm going to buy another one. I think we need to open this and we need to read it every once in a while. This is the foundation of our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the foundation of our Judeo Christian governance in America. This is what all of our laws derive from. We need to know what it says. Folks, get a copy.
Amen to that, Pastor Dave. You know, and part of that, and I agree with you, it's the content of the document and what it resulted in, what it created in our governmental structure. It's not necessarily the parchment it was printed on. But part of denigrating that is to call into question every relic that was ever associated with us. Because try as they might, they want to erase every vestige of this. And so if they can impugn the original copy here, that's all that was about. And unfortunately, we don't they don't win on this account because all you have to do is flip the document over and check and see if there's a treasure map back there. There isn't. And and then at the top it says original Declaration of Independence from 4th July 1776. End of story. This is the one they had on the desk in Independence Hall that they put their names to on July 4th, 1776. There is no question about it. Another relic we have that is priceless is this is the inkwell, the silver inkwell that the signers of both the Declaration and the Constitution dipped their pens in. I'll give
Wow,
you that. We don't have any of the original pens, but we have the inkwell.
this is incredible.
Now, we'll talk a little bit about now, of course, they need to circulate this to the colonies. So you're not going to just have them keep producing handwritten copies and then of course they had ways of making engraved copies that look like handwritten copies. I'm going to show you one in a second. How they did those things is just beyond me, the craftsmanship. But this is really the first print copy. It's called the Goddard Broadside that was circulated that contains the names of who signed it. Those the copies that were, and this wasn't released till January of 1777. So there's quite a number of months here where they were circulating the document without the names. You can imagine why that is,
Oh yeah,
because
they don't
they
want to
weren't
get
going
caught.
to tip their hat to the British of who to come pick up.
Right.
So this was called the Goddard Broadside. Is the one that they first printed, showing the names of the signers. And this is an equally important copy of this. Now, In 1820, John Quincy Adams became president, and he took a look at the original Declaration of Independence. He saw that degraded. It was even starting to get bad in 1820. Not like it is today, but it was showing the effects of age. And this is where the first realization was we're going to have to do something to preserve the original, what the original said, and get back to what it looked like. Um, and they actually were able to find an engraver, a printer named William J. Stone, to do a full-size copper plate engraving. And it was used to print the copies of the Declaration. The 1823 stone engraving is what you're looking at, and it is the most frequently reproduced version of the Declaration ever. And just look how beautiful and clean that is. And it is in every way like a photocopy of the handwritten copy. So obviously, it was in better condition, allowed him to do this at the time. I don't know if they used some kind of overlay technique to do the engraving, but it's just, if you compare the original to this, you can't see a difference. Maybe somebody can explain to me someday how that happens. Now, this is Pastor Dave. I don't know how you would like to parse this up. Whether you'd like to do it in one long program, whether you'd like to parse it.
Let's. Yeah, we've been talking since 2 o'clock when recording, so we've been talking about an hour and 47 minutes. We should probably take a break here, and because it's a very long session. We do want to do other sessions about uh, lots of different things about American history, slavery, uh, what happened on the Mayflower, and there's just so many different topics that we. I don't know about you, but I absolutely love learning about history. One of the problems that we have, and is that okay with you?
I'm fine with it.
Okay. One of the problems that we're having, one of the reasons we started Classroom USA under USA Heartbeat is um, there is an effort to rewrite American history. There is an effort
Mm.
to destroy its meaning. There's an effort to destroy its importance. There's an effort to impugn its credibility. There's an effort to impugn the motivations of the founding fathers when they come to us and say that. And we saw evidence today of the first, this is before the Civil War. The, early on,
Mm.
the colonists were saying, tied to the King of England, Queen of England, whoever it was, King of England, slavery is not a good idea and we should stop it. So when you come to me and say America is a slave nation, slavery is talked about in the Bible, Old Testament.
Yeah.
This is not something that the American founding fathers, this is not something George Washington said, you know what? I think I'm going to go get those people from Africa and they'll work on my plantation. But there's people that are revisionists, you call them, that are trying to impugn the credibility, the motivation. They're evil white men, ogres that were just in it to become rich. And that's not the case. That's not the story. The facts get in the way of their attempt to revise American history. One of the things I'll never forget is one lady from South America. I wasn't there. I watched it on TV. A presidential debate in the last or the preceding presidential election. She stood up and she said, "You folks in America have got to get this figured out because, listen to this, if not America, where? If not America, where? Where do we go? Where is the Statue of Liberty in the harbor? Where is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Where are the Bill of Rights? Where are our foundational freedoms ingrained in the founding documents of our nation?" An attorney who was trying to defend a person in Canada who was silently praying outside an abortion clinic said, "I wish I could defend my client in the United States of America because you have rights of speech that are ingrained in foundational documents of your nation. I wish I could defend this case in America because I'd win. Here in Canada, good luck with that." But he was saying, "I wish I could fight this case in your country." Lady in South America said, "Fix this, America, because don't screw this up because there's nowhere else to
Mm.
go."
No.
We need to hear
America
that.
is the best government form of government that's ever existed. It's based on biblical foundations, and we're going to when we get into the next session, that'll become even more apparent. And we're going to listen to what the founders themselves had to say. If there's anybody that's doubting whether this country was founded by Christian men or whether this country was formed as a Christian nation, there won't be any doubts after this is done.
Wow. And we're going to continue to do this. We're going to do this and other topics with Mike Keating about history, because we're not rewriting history. We're just learning from it. And so, Mike, thank you for what you've done in the past and continue to do in the future. We're excited about working with you to bring these stories to an audience that really, really needs to hear it.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I greatly appreciate it.
Let's end in a word of prayer. Lord Jesus,
Thank you.
we pray for patriots who love God and love the founding values of this nation. We pray for their courage to be increased, amplified, emboldened by your Holy Spirit, that one nation under God with liberty and justice for all, words that have rung through history. Lord, we embrace those words. Lord, on earth as it is in heaven. We ask for your blessing on America. We ask for God to bless America once again. But Lord, we ask for you to clean house in this nation. We need to get back to biblical standard. We need to get back to biblical interpretation of Judeo Christian philosophy and law as was intended by the founders who were men of God. Lord, help us to right the ship. Help us to steer this nation into a godly direction once again. We come against any principalities of the devil, Satan, the evil one, who is trying to destroy America because it should be again a godly nation, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Amen, my friend. So, folks, if you have any questions, you can send me an email, dave@classroomUSA.net, dave@usaheartbeat.com, or dave@streetlevelamerica.com. Mike, is there if people have a question or comment for you, do you have a correspondence way you want them to send that?
I should set something better up than what I have, but I think for
Okay.
right now, do you have a blog? Do you
Yeah,
have a blog
I can,
spot or collect
we can
emails?
forward it to Mike.
Yeah.
And so just send me the information and we'll see that Mike gets it. Mike, we
If
look
you
forward
want
to
to,
more of
if
these.
I'd be glad to answer any of those.
Okay. And we look forward to doing more sessions about this in the future as we look at the the godly roots of America. They are there. People are trying to tell you they don't exist. They don't really mean what it said. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. God bless, Mike, and we look forward to doing this again.
Thank you so much.